Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Becoming a Bible Nerd. And while everyone is getting on this morning, we're going to visit for a few minutes about starting a Bible study of your own, going through passages of Scripture, studying books along with us. Good morning. If you are interested, and I've been getting emails of people interested in starting this in their own church. Some of you have even started this on your own, maybe not even with a Bible Nerd study, but with a Lifeway study or something, and I think that is great. But if you want to study with a group of women for Esther, I suggest that you put an invite out there. Whoever's interested, plan a meeting day, and then assign the chapter for the week, and I'm assuming y'all would do one chapter a week like we do here, and have different women assigned to teach it. So maybe week 1, 2 different women in your group would do the first part and the second part of the chapter, and whenever they get to a pause while they're doing their teaching and their findings, if anyone else in the group found additional information, they can interject that and there can be conversation. But I have found that that is the best way, when someone different each week is assigned to be the person that's doing the presenting of the text. And so that makes them dig in a little bit more. They have to get their thoughts together. I'm doing it with 2 girls in high school right now through the book of Timothy, and it actually blows me away, the knowledge that they have. They're not only understanding the Word of God, but they're also quoting from Constable or other sources, and I learn something every single week with them. They bring something to the table that I haven't found. And so you can do this with your own children. You can do this with women in your church. You can do men out there. You can do this with men. And it makes the whole study experience so much more fun. And to me, this whole thing is kind of like working out. Some of you are dedicated to do this on your own, but for me, if I know that my workout partners are not going to be there, then I sleep in. But I know if they're there, then I'm motivated to get up and do it. It's accountability. Well, that's what Bible Nerds is all about. It's just accountability. You could do this on your own, but chances are you find excuses and you're too busy if you're like me. But if we know that we're going to meet together on a certain day and talk about it, then we're more likely to do it. So good morning, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. This is a good day. We get to meet our heroine and our hero of the story. So turn to chapter 2 of Esther, and let's go ahead and dig in. And I'm going to read this first section, first 4 verses. It said, "Sometime later, when King Ahasuerus when King Ahasuerus's rage had cooled down, he remembered Vashti, what she had done, and what was decided against her. The king's personal attendant suggested, let a search be made for a beautiful young woman for the king. Let the king appoint commissioners in each province of the kingdom, so that they may assemble all the beautiful young women to the harem at the fortress of Susa. Put them under the care of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women, and give them the required beauty treatments. Then the young woman who pleases the king will become queen instead of Vashti." This suggestion pleased the king, and he did accordingly. So it starts out saying sometime later. It's actually been 3 years later. So he made Vashti give up her crown, and then he went to war against the Greeks. So for 3 years, he's been battling the Greeks. He has not been finding success. We know this from historical Persian documents. So he comes back home feeling defeated, and then he remembers Vashti. In fact, that terminology, remembered Vashti, gives us a clue that he is having some regret about his decision. But he cannot revoke a law, and this is going to play a huge part in our story later, to know that under Persian law, once something has been set in motion, the king cannot change this. We actually also saw this under Babylonian law with Daniel. There was a king that King Darius rose to power, and some people in the land kind of tricked Darius for signing this decree that if someone doesn't if somebody worships another god other than him as king, then they will be put to death by lions. And Daniel, they were framing Daniel, Darius signs that's not realizing what's going on, and then Daniel is going to get thrown into the lion's den. And we find out that when the next moment that they see that the lions have not eaten Daniel, Darius was relieved. So this is a strange law that we see time and time again in the Middle East. So he gets his attendants, or they suggested for there to be a big search for the most beautiful woman in the kingdom, because this all started around Vashti's beauty. She was called in to show off her beauty, and so they thought, we can solve this by getting someone even more beautiful than her. There's a Greek historian, Herodotus. We talked a lot about a historian named Josephus in the New Testament. Well, there was also one that we can get extra information of what's going on in the time. It's not biblical information, but it is historical. And so we can learn a little bit more about the culture. And he wrote that there were 7 aristocratic families in Persia that the wives were typically chosen from. So Vashti was probably from one of these 7 aristocratic families. But this time, this is a very strange and unusual plan. The attendants say, let's go throughout the kingdom. So it could be someone from a very poor village, or it could be anyone other than just these 7 aristocratic families. This was risky, but there's a lot of speculation that these men were worried that somehow the king would find a loophole to get Vashti reinstated, and then she was going to do something to them to retaliate against their suggestion of deposing her. So women were searched out. Oh, I hear little feet coming. Good morning. And they were going to be brought to a harem in Susa. This is where the king was living. His palace was there. So this harem is a place where women lived in seclusion in the house of one man. And in this harem, oh my goodness, she's all over my notes, beauty treatments were going to be taking place, getting these women ready for the king. So in verse 5, it starts off saying, in the fortress of Susa, there was a Jewish man named Mordecai. In the fortress of Susa gives us a clue that it's likely that Mordecai had a key position and was allowed many places. Not just anyone was allowed inside the fortress. And we learn from even Daniel. He was a wealthy, well-educated man living in Israel, and when the Babylonian exile came, he rose to power in Babylon. So we know that in this land where these Jews had been living in exile, they were, if they were from wealthy, well-educated families, they were used in government, sometimes in high places. So this would not be unheard of for Mordecai, this Jewish man, to be having a key position, and it allowed him access where most people wouldn't have access. His name, Mordecai, is the Jewish form of a Persian name, Marduk, which was the main Babylonian god. So here, I know that that had to have been horrible for him, where he believes that there's only one true God, and you're not supposed to, by the 10 Commandments, put any other god higher than your God, but he's carrying around this name that is for the Babylonian god. So then it goes on to some genealogy. It says that this Jewish man named Mordecai, son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjamite. This may seem not important. Back before I studied like I do now, I would have just said da-da-da, 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 and skipped along. Anytime there's a genealogy, it is placed there on purpose. The genealogy of the Jewish people were of the utmost importance. It's so important to be able to trace your roots, to trace what tribe you're in. And in fact, this was so well documented. And all of these family trees were kept in the temple, but the Romans destroyed the temple in 70 AD, and most records had been destroyed. But this gives us some important information we need to know for chapter 3 to understand this animosity between the villain of the story, Haman, and Mordecai. So we're not going to get into who these 3 men are, son of Jair, Shimei, and Kish, until next chapter. But we need to know, just tuck away, that they are from the tribe of Benjamin. This is important. And when you read genealogies, when you see the son of, We're going to put those in quotes. That means that they are the descendant of. It's another way to say that this man, Mordecai, is the descendant of these three men. Usually in genealogies, they're not exhaustive. We've learned that from Matthew and Genesis. It's not going to put every single person in the family tree or it'd be 1,000,000 miles long. But what they do is they put well-known difference makers in their genealogy. People of importance for their family history, where everyone, even centuries later, would go, oh, we know who that is. And so this list is not exhaustive, but clearly they put some very important Benjamites in this line. Now, it is we know that the very first king of Israel, King Saul, was a Benjamite. So it appears that Mordecai is from a royal family. Now, this is also going to play an important part. We need to know this. King Saul, the first king of Israel, disobeyed a direct order from the Lord, and God took his crown away. And that's how David, the little shepherd boy that slayed Goliath, that's how he got to become king. He was from the tribe of Judah, a completely different line. He was not heir to the throne, but because of Saul's direct disobedience from the Lord, he lost his crown. And this is going to play a factor in this next story with Haman, and we'll find out in chapter 3 why that's important to know. Also, we have to notice after the genealogy, the next sentence starts with he. So Mordecai was the son of Jair, Shimei, Kish, a Benjamite. He had been taken into exile from Jerusalem with other captives when King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon had the exile. Now, I read so many different things of who this he was. If he was talking about Mordecai, that he was living in Israel, and when the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar came and exiled them, this would place him at 120 years old. I, in all the research that I did, do not feel that this is Mordecai. Some scholars that I trust and follow do, but this is what I found, that the word he indicates, or was a word used meaning the tribe or the family. And so this is another way of saying this tribe of Benjamin had been taken away into exile. Not necessarily, it might have been one of these other people in the genealogy. It might have just been somebody else in the family that they didn't feel important to list. But this tribe of Benjamin was taken into exile. And so we are not sure who exactly in the genealogy of Mordecai was exiled, but I don't think that it was Mordecai. Okay, that's just some boring facts probably for most of you. So then it goes on to say that Mordecai was the legal guardian of his cousin Hadassah. That is Esther, because she didn't have a mother or father, and that she was a young woman with a beautiful figure and was extremely good looking. So her face was beautiful, her body was beautiful, she had it all. She was an orphan girl. Now, we talked a little bit last week about her Persian name, that this book was actually named after. It means star in Persia. It also means something hidden. We know that she is going to hide her ethnicity. We'll talk about that in a minute. But also God is hidden on the pages of this text. But the word star, Esther is named after a Persian goddess of fertility named Ishtar. This Persian goddess, was actually worshipped in all different countries under different names, but her name was Ishtar here. She was celebrated with symbols of bunnies and eggs. If that sounds familiar to any of y'all, we still celebrate her today on the same day as Resurrection Sunday. We call it Easter, or we call her name Easter in English. Kind of crazy how anytime something amazing and godly and that can change the world, like Jesus' resurrection, Satan comes with a counterfeit to distract us. So her name is Esther, and she was beautiful and shapely, and this is what Tom Bradford says about her. Remember that King Cyrus had told all of the Jews that they could return to their homeland, and they really needed to be there to worship God the way God had written in the law of Moses. But we had some people living comfortable. They liked Persia. They liked all it had to offer. They were successful there, so they stayed. So Esther and Mordecai aren't exactly living up to what God had called them to live. And this is what Constable says about her on page 474. Esther cooperated in practices contrary to Mosaic law. Mosaic law was the law given to us in the first 5 books of the Bible that Moses wrote. This included having sex with a man not her husband, because she will have to go in one night with the king to try to impress him before he chooses to marry her. Marrying a pagan was unlawful. Eating unclean food. This sets Esther in contrast to Daniel, who purposed not to defile himself, not even to eat unclean food. And then the Bible Knowledge commentary had some more to say about it. From this and other statements in the book, it is clear that the author was making a point that God protected and used Esther and Mordecai in spite of the fact that they were not living according to the law commanded by God to the people of Israel. Esther could be contrasted with Daniel, who refused to eat from the king's table because the food would have been unclean by Jewish law. So Esther and Mordecai were living this life that was not completely devoted to pleasing God. But here's the thing. We talked about this last week. I'm going to read it again in 2 Timothy. And it just shows the goodness of God in spite of our failure. It says in 2 Timothy, if we are faithless, he remains faithful. He cannot deny himself. So this morning, this is not a message of, oh, do whatever you want, God will use you anyway. That's not what I'm saying. But when we mess up and we come back to God and we think, here I am, God, use me. He doesn't count these things against us. He can even use Mordecai and Esther, who are not even living up according to the Mosaic law. He can use us. He can use you. He can use me. He's not expecting perfection. And when we are faithless, he still is faithful. He has to be good and just like his character is. And so I want to leave you with that encouragement. If you went to Carrie Prouse's session, she thought for a long time that all she would ever be at church is a registration girl, allowed to sign people into conferences and stuff. But God will allow you to be much more than just a registration girl. So moving on. Esther was one of these people chosen to go to Susa to live in the harem. And, Rochelle Briggs just sent a text. I'll have to read that later. She charmed Haggai, the king's eunuch that took care of these. And I have to back up and say that Tom Bradford said that a lot of movies out there will look at this like as a kidnapping, going in the night and snatching up these pretty girls. That probably was not the case. Arranged marriages were very common in this day and time, and most marriages were arranged by parents, and it was to elevate something for them. It's something that they could get back in return. So it wasn't just, oh, we think this man is lovely and could provide for our daughter. It usually was to benefit them in some way. So this is not contrary to a normal marriage. And for many families, they would want their daughter to be queen, because if they became queen, it would elevate their status. They would get to live in the palace, and they would be given the best jobs. And so it's probably likely that most people are pushing their daughters into this harem. So she charmed Haggai. She got special accelerated beauty treatments, a special diet. She was assigned 7 maidservants. There's that number to a Jewish person. They're seeing God on the page. And she had the best living space in the harem. Mordecai told her to hide her Jewishness. Now, this kind of confused me, because King Cyrus, the first king of the Persian Empire, allowed the Jews to return home to rebuild their temple and gave them funding and supplies to do it. He was for the Jewish people. The king that will come after Xerxes, Artaxerxes, he's going to allow people to rebuild the wall to protect them. He's going to give them supplies. He's going to be very supportive. So it looks like the hierarchy of this country has no problem with Jewish people. They're actually for Jewish people. But we have to just read between the lines and realize that apparently there were some people in this melting pot of cultures in the Persian kingdom. It was like America, just the melting pot. Lots of different people that were allowed to practice their traditional customs and language. They must have not like Jewish people. It makes me, I was thinking about this last night, like my grandparents came from Italy, and it blows my mind that my mom and her siblings did not learn Italian. But it was there was a lot of derogatory things said to them growing up, and they were almost looked down upon for different things. And so it was almost like my grandparents wanted to just assimilate into the culture. They wanted them to speak English and look like everyone else to protect them from people who were prejudiced against them. In this culture in Persia, everyone is allowed to have their own practice of ways and to speak their own language and to celebrate their own culture. So there probably were people groups that did not like each other. They did not all look the same, act the same, and this could cause some problems. So it is her turn, Esther's turn, to go before the king. It's going to be her night. And before a woman would go before the king, she was allowed to take something beautiful, an adornment, to wear to accelerate or to accentuate her beauty, a pair of earrings or a necklace or tiara. And it was Esther's turn to go, and it was her chance to say what type of adornment she wanted. And Haggai suggested she not wear one at all. And so she listened to what he said, and she found favor with the king. She went in without an adornment, and he did like her. Now, what has been happening to all these women living in the harem that were likely virgins? Because the king, in this honor-shame society, men would only want a virgin. They go into this harem, they go one night with the king, and then he passes them on. They do not go to the same place that all the other virgins are. They're not virgins anymore. They will go to a different holding place. It's a harem for women who have been used by the king. There's a different eunuch taking care of them, and sadly, a lot of times they would never see the king again unless called upon. And of course, he's only going to call upon his favorites. So if you didn't please him, you would live the rest of your days forgotten, a lot of times alone and childless because you don't have another husband. And if you were by chance released to be free, no man is going to marry you because you are not a virgin anymore. In this honor shame society, this woman, she was going to have to live the life of a widow for the rest of her life. It was an extremely cruel and sad situation. So Esther goes in. He absolutely loves her. She gets chosen to be queen. And Mordecai asks her to keep quiet about her ethnicity. Now we find out in the story that later her uncle Darius, and I've lost my place, her uncle Darius, I obviously can't read and talk at the same time. Mordecai is going to end up overhearing a conversation between some of the king's guards, and they are plotting an assassination against him, or against the king. And Mordecai tells Esther, and the two guys are Bigtath and Teresh. They're the king's eunuchs. And so he tells the queen tells the king, and these men, it says, are hung in the gallows, and actually means that they were impaled on a stake or post. And then Carrie Prowse had told me that basically it was crucifixion. The Persians invented crucifixion. The Romans perfected it. So these men are hung, and Mordecai, it says that what Mordecai did, that event was recorded in the historical records in the king's presence. This is going to play a part of our story later, so we need to remember that. Mordecai should have been given some sort of reward for his actions, but the king is going to forget but he'll remember later, and that's going to be an important part. This is all God's providence. It's a good thing he wasn't rewarded immediately, because this is going to help us in our story later. So there was a lot to talk about in this little chapter. I hope I didn't bore you too much with history, but we need to know these things. Next week, we will discover a little bit more about this genealogy of Mordecai, because this is going to play a huge role in the hatred and animosity between the villain and Mordecai. And I will see you next Thursday. Tune in Tuesday, and I know you will, because she had like 2,500 views to Katie's lesson on a heart connection with our kids. It's going to be great. See you next Thursday. Happy reading.